This is just unbelievable. Now the US Secretary of the Treasury comes out and suddenly says that they might actually want to buy Bitcoin again, and are currently looking for budget-neutral ways to add Bitcoin to the US reserves. Just yesterday, there was a big speech saying that, yeah, the US isn't really going to buy Bitcoin. We won't be selling anything either, but it was all very, very confusing. And just yesterday I said, somehow, this doesn't make any sense. The statements are so contradictory. Something's not right here. And now we've figured out what exactly is off here. He probably got chewed out by Donald Trump or, I don't know, by someone else, and ended up talking nonsense. Maybe he was drunk. Some people have already commented that maybe he had a few too many shots and now had to backpedal. And suddenly we're back in the game. And now even Cynthia Lummis joins in and says, there's already the Bitcoin bill here. We already have the law to buy 1 million Bitcoin here. We need to reevaluate gold here, reassess the value of gold. Guys, we're back in the game. It's crazy how things are going back and forth here. The Bitcoin price barely reacted, as we also saw. The Bitcoin price was unaffected here. That means the Bitcoin price probably just dropped yesterday because of the PPI inflation data, and not because of the Bitcoin story here. Let's take a look at the whole thing. Before we dive in, smash the like button below for higher Bitcoin prices, for new all-time highs, and for the ultra-bullish Bitcoin crash helmet here, the bike helmet right here. Of course, you always have to stay safe out here. We're seeing volatile times. And for volatile times, we obviously need the best protection here. Michael Saylor even tweeted it yesterday. Volatility is a gift for the believers. But now, let's take a look at what Scott Bessent tweeted here. And this thing is really, really going viral. Here, he says the Bitcoins that have finally been forfeited to the federal government will form the basis of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, which President Trump established in his executive order from March. And watch out, here it comes. Furthermore, the Treasury Department is determined to explore budget-neutral ways to acquire more Bitcoin and thus expand the reserves. So here, it's very clear they're talking about expanding the reserves, folks. Do you understand what's going on here? This is controversial. It couldn't be more controversial. This is exactly the opposite of what was said here yesterday. Yesterday, there was no mention here of finding budget-neutral ways to accumulate new Bitcoin. They basically just said they wouldn't sell it, or that maybe the reserves could be expanded with confiscated Bitcoin or from confiscated sources. He even addressed that. But now, all of a sudden, it seems like they might be able to buy Bitcoin again. He also wants to fulfill the president's promise to make the United States the world's Bitcoin superpower. And that's basically another confirmation right here. I mean, guys, are you kidding me? You can't be a Bitcoin superpower. I mean, the world's Bitcoin superpower, without actually having Bitcoin here, without any significant Bitcoin holdings. What has also come out now is that the US might not even have the most Bitcoin in the world. I mean, the US has to buy Bitcoin here, otherwise it just can't be done. And right now, it's most likely that Scott Bessent will have to backtrack, because, for example, Donald Trump or someone else said, hey man, you misspoke here. That might have been a bit awkward, but then go ahead and correct it now. And of course, that's the crazy part of the story. Or maybe he was involved in some kind of insider trading here. Which, to be clear, I'm not accusing him of, and that's also a valid question here in the comments. So, are you going to buy Bitcoin now or not? The whole thing is really, really contradictory. Buying in a budget-neutral way would still be buying, right? So yeah, exactly. Budget-neutral buying is still buying. What's also interesting is that, if you break it down, everything here is theoretically, let's say, stolen, because just yesterday it was said that you could only use seized Bitcoin here. So, in theory, everything here is stolen. Now, for example, there was also this theory from Florian Kosler, and that's a theory I've already talked about twice on the channel. Here, you don't have to buy any Bitcoin, because sooner or later you'll hand over all of MicroStrategy's Bitcoin holdings to the government. That's the next theory, because the problem is, if the US just buys Bitcoin on the open market, it would completely shake up the markets. That's why you could either expropriate MicroStrategy or other treasury companies. The theory has long been that maybe 1 or 2 treasury companies will have to make way at some point, so that a new Bitcoin strategic reserve can be established. Tom Lee has talked about it. Preston Pysh has talked about it. Other people have already talked about it. Now, even people in the German-speaking world are talking about it. That would actually be the easiest way for the US to get a lot of Bitcoin without heavily moving the markets, by confiscating it from a treasury company. Of course, it wouldn't really be confiscation. They would just say, okay, MicroStrategy is worth $4,000. We're giving you $1,000 per share now. Now hand over all the Bitcoin to us. Then Michael Saylor would have made a pretty good deal, and the US would have made a pretty good deal too. And even though they're paying a premium here, they still acquired Bitcoin cheaper than if they bought on the spot market, because that would push the price up massively. There were also some comments about this. For example, CJ from Strategy writes here, revaluate the gold by Bitcoin. That's definitely an option you could go for. And the thing is, Cynthia Lummis actually wrote exactly that here as well. She says here, hey, I have a bill for this whole thing that's going on. What Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is proposing here in the US, to buy Bitcoin in a budget-neutral way. Cynthia Lummis says she has a bill for this. So, Cynthia Lummis is already confirming that Scott Bessent actually phrased it in a way that he wants to buy Bitcoin. That means, in Scott Bessent's tweet, it's kind of contradictory again. You could potentially buy Bitcoin, but he doesn't explicitly say, we're buying Bitcoin now. He phrased it a bit more openly, and Cynthia Lummis is interpreting it very clearly. Hey, I have a bill here for what you wrote about. So Cynthia Lummis is saying they will buy or want to buy Bitcoin. And now the only question is, how much? If it's 1 million Bitcoins, then Cynthia Lummis would have the corresponding bill for it. And now, watch out, she goes even further. She says here, Scott Bessent is right. A budget-neutral way to build a solid economic structure is the right way. We can't save our country from a $37 trillion debt by buying more Bitcoin, but we can revalue the gold reserves at today's price and use the increase in value to build a solid economic structure. America needs the Bitcoin Act. Let's go. That means we might even get an extra push now, because after it was initially rejected, now it's basically coming back again. Now there's a counterattack, now other politicians are jumping on it, and so on. Because of that, the whole thing is actually becoming even more of a hot topic. So, what's happening here isn't actually bad at all. I mean, in addition, I have to say that what I said in the last video still doesn't apply. Bitcoin doesn't need the USA. Bitcoin doesn't need Scott Bessent. Bitcoin doesn't need Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump, Scott Bessent, and so on. They're the ones who all need the USA. The USA is... Wait, what did I just say? Wrong. Scott Bessent, Donald Trump, and so on. They all need Bitcoin here. That means they're the ones dependent on Bitcoin here. Not that Bitcoin is dependent on the politicians. That's extremely important to remember. You should never get that mixed up here. So it's also interesting to see what's happening here. Here we see the Mubadala Investment Fund, which is now holding on to its Bitcoin position. And there was also the report here that the Mubadala Investment Fund now has another 147 million in new Bitcoin exposure. That was a bit misleading here. That doesn't mean that new Bitcoin was bought here, but rather that the position is simply worth more now, and that's why some people interpreted it as a purchase. But what's interesting here is that other investment funds, let's say, sovereign wealth funds and so on, are also focused on Bitcoin. They're now basically either accumulating as well or at least holding on to their holdings. That means the US is already coming under pressure here, if you asked me. Especially because of what British HODL is saying here. He says here that now would be the perfect opportunity for China, Russia, or India to announce a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Of course, that was before Scott Bessent backtracked here, before Scott Bessent said, hey, maybe we will buy Bitcoin after all. I'm curious to see what happens tomorrow. Tomorrow is the summit, after all. No, not tomorrow, but today. Today is the summit between Putin and Trump. It would, of course, also be exciting if that topic came up in the conversation. It's also quite interesting how so many Bitcoiners have now become nervous and angry, because people have just read so much into what's happening in the US. A lot of people, honestly, are just reading way too much into it. I don't know, they're just overinterpreting everything. For them, It's like the end of the world if the US doesn't buy Bitcoin. And when the US does buy Bitcoin again, then everything is just fantastic. I mean, that's all well and good. You can watch it. It's cool and all that. And I do report on it too. But you really shouldn't let your mood depend on it. And you definitely shouldn't base your investment case or anything like that on it. What was interesting was that the price didn't really react that strongly to it. You could clearly see that the PPI inflation rates were what actually drove the price, and people, the market, they really didn't care much about it. That's already quite an interesting story. There are a few things that really only get the X community or the social media community excited. People debate it like crazy. Everyone freaks out. Like, oh, Trump is buying, Trump isn't buying, this, that, whatever. But the price doesn't care at all. And then there are other things that hardly get discussed at all. But the big money is watching those things, like inflation numbers. Or for example, government bond yields, or the long-term debt levels. Topics like these in the mainstream, or, well, what does mainstream even mean? Twitter x Bitcoin bubble isn't really mainstream, but in what I'd call the Bitcoin mainstream, these kinds of things tend to get swept under the rug a bit. They're just not considered that important there. For example, the Bitcoin purchases by the US are seen as more important there, but apparently, they don't really have that much influence on the Bitcoin price here. What's really important to take away here is what Jeff Park says at the end. I've seen a lot of Bitcoin setups over different time periods, and this is objectively the simplest BTC bull setup of all time. To be honest, it's not always going to be this easy. So just thank your lucky stars, hug your loved ones, relax, and enjoy the ride. That's also why I'm wearing a helmet, because what's coming our way now is going to be absolutely massive. You really have to protect yourself from those massive gains. So put on your protection, put on your gear so you're prepared when the mainstream starts throwing things at you, because eventually people will start getting jealous that you discovered Bitcoin, that you bet on Bitcoin, and they'll say, oh, I missed the rally. I wasn't in on it. But just like Jeff Park says here, the setup is so easy to spot. The whole USA is betting on Bitcoin. Scott Besson now also has to come out in support of Bitcoin. Donald Trump is a Bitcoiner. Howard Lipnick is a Bitcoiner. Kennedy is a Bitcoiner. They're all Bitcoiners. You could go down a whole list now. And the craziest thing is, anyone who speaks out against Bitcoin gets chewed out by someone. Either it's Donald Trump. I don't know who's doing the chewing out, but someone is definitely giving people a hard time. By the way, getting chewed out isn't even that bad. You guys should try it every now and then. Just put some water in the back. Let's fucking go. But someone always gives them. Like a jab says, hey guys, you're being too bearish. You need to be bullish. Or only people who are Bitcoiners are picked for the Trump administration. So we're just seeing this kind of pattern. You either have to be a Bitcoiner. If you're not a Bitcoiner, you're out. Which we've also seen. The whole Democrats, Operation Choke Point 2.0 and all that, they're being dealt with really harshly. Like, really targeted. What did I read? Earlier, Donald Trump said something against Elizabeth Warren. He said she should take a drug test or something like that. Elizabeth Warren was also a major Bitcoin critic. That means anyone who criticizes Bitcoin gets smacked down. And now there's even the anti-Bitcoin law. So anyone spreading FUD about Bitcoin here and debanking people, it's mainly about debanking, will basically be prosecuted by law. That means anyone who's against Bitcoin gets weeded out, or only people are chosen. How do you say, selected, who are pro-Bitcoin? That's pretty crazy, of course. Man, what crazy times we're living in, folks. But it's awesome to be here, to be able to watch all of this from the sidelines. It's very, very safe here with, always. And if you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll drop a link below for 21 Bitcoin. There you can easily and securely buy Bitcoin. Just click the link below, check out 21 Bitcoin, enter the code Bitcoin Hotel, and you can save up to 20% on fees when buying Bitcoin. Highly recommended. See you guys. Till then, peace out.